We're going to call the meeting for Ukiah Valley Basin Groundwater Sustainability Agency to order. Clerk, please conduct roll call.
Director Robinson.
Present.
Director White.
Here.
Director Brandy Brown. Here. Director Crane.
Present.
Chair Brown.
Here. All right. Miss Devon Jones, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Oh.
Director Cardoza. My apologies.
It's okay. We know it's your first meeting. That's great. All right. Ms. Jones.
Salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next item of business, we have consent items, and that's approval of minutes from the January 11th, 2018 regular meeting.
So moved.
We have a motion to approve by Vice Chair Crane, and we have a second by Director Cardoza. Roll call, please.
Director Robinson.
Aye.
Director White. Director Brown.
On the minutes or the agenda?
Last month.
I'm abstaining.
It's on the minutes.
Director Crane.
Aye.
Director Cardoza.
Aye.
Chair Brown.
Aye. All right.
Motion carries.
Thank you. We have a special presentation today, and this is regarding the Department of Water Resources California Water Plan and the Russian River Pilot for watershed sustainability. Would you like to come forward, introduce yourself, and...
You can stand or sit, whatever.
Let me try standing. Good afternoon. Is that on?
yeah, can you state your name for the record?
Sure.
Thank you.
I'm Charles Gardner. I'm working with California Forward, and we have a project that's funded by the Department of Water Resources, and it is a pilot effort in the Russian River watershed. And I'm going to walk through a little bit of what the effort is, and what we've accomplished in the past 3 or 4 months in phase 1, and then the plan for phase 2 during this year. Appreciate Supervisor Brown inviting me here. We definitely want to establish broader connections in Mendocino County. Supervisor Brown has been participating since September, and that's been a great connection. We want to expand that connection as we're entering into phase 2. But let me give you a little bit of background first. The California Water Plan is prepared by the Department of Water Resources as sort of the roadmap for water resources management for the entire state. It's updated every 5 years, and this year, 2018, is one of those update years. So they're preparing the draft update. Actually, the draft update is due for release sometime later this month, with the final update planned for the end of the year. And I'll probably come back to that. But in the Russian River, there are lots of initiatives, lots of coordinating efforts to manage water resources. The Russian River Pilot is one small piece of that. The Russian River Confluence is a larger piece, working across both counties to think about how do we manage the resources of the watershed more effectively, more cooperatively. And then there are numerous efforts have been over the years for alternate regulatory approaches, some innovative approaches to governance, problem solving, and that's one of the reasons that DWR selected the Russian River watershed as an area to pilot these efforts for the water plan. because there's a history of collaboration, innovation in the watershed. We want to build on that, learn from that, and apply that at the statewide level. Those things come together and really collectively represent sustainable water management, and that's really what this pilot effort is exploring, is how do we advance and accelerate sustainable water resources management, sustainable watershed management, not just here in the Russian River watershed, but in watersheds and regions across the state. And I'll expand on that a little bit. So just some sort of a context framing to think about sustainability management. It is trying to think at the system scale. So in this case, it's the watershed scale. It's understanding through assessment what the current conditions are, thinking about what future conditions could or should be, thinking about governance and decision-making at the system scale. How can we coordinate that governance and decision-making? Developing a management strategy, including goals, outcomes, metrics of how we measure sustainability. Aligning regulatory processes that sometimes conflict, sometimes overlap, and frequently frustrate the implementation of actions that are focused on improving sustainability in the watershed. And then looking at funding and finance. How do we pay for things that are conceived or implemented at the system scale, at the watershed scale? Are there ways to weave together funding sources? Are there innovative funding approaches? And then obviously the action implementation, if we're going to make progress towards a more sustainable region or a more sustainable watershed, we have to think through the implementation, including all of those other factors. The Russian River pilot is focused on really primarily three aspects of that. The assessment, and I'll get back to that in terms of the water plan and the approach to that. The regulatory alignment, looking at ways to be more innovative or creative with the regulatory processes, and then looking at funding and finance. Those are the three primary areas that we've been focused on to try to contribute some ideas to the water plan and statewide strategies. So let me walk through those three areas just very conceptually. The water plan this year in the update, they've put quite an emphasis on moving towards more sustainable water management across the state and developing an assessment process for how would we understand where we stand regionally in watersheds across the state on sustainability. So this is a conceptual representation of the framing that is developing in the water plan, and it's focused first on 4 societal values that define sustainability, and those are listed in those circles around there: public health and safety, ecosystem vitality, thriving economy, and enriching experiences. So that's the general framing of sustainability that they're establishing in the water plan. And then developing some ways to measure in very varied watersheds and regions across the state, where do we stand on that? So that's looking at outcomes, or goals, if you will, and trying to define a set of outcomes that represent those 4 societal values, or a way of looking at those 4 societal values. And then looking at what are the indicators of that. How do we measure where we stand on those outcomes? So they're framing up that work. That's going to be in the draft water plan. What we're trying to do in the pilot is look at how does that apply here. DWR and the other state agencies are quite interested in understanding, as they think about this, does it actually work? And so that's the intent of the pilot, is to use that framing and then work with water managers, other stakeholders across the watershed, and see how does that work in the Russian River watershed. So that's the intent of the pilot. On regulatory alignment, typically we think of regulations as applying to projects and permits, sort of the left side of this diagram, different types of permits, water rights, discharge permits, permits for restoring habitat, all sorts of different kinds of regulatory processes. Those flow from a variety of different programs, recovery programs, irrigated lands programs in some parts of the state, groundwater sustainability plans, all sorts of different kinds of programs. But they really are focused on system outcomes. And so what we're really trying to explore here is if we think in the Russian River watershed of what are the big system outcomes that we want to achieve, how can we do a better job as we move back to the left in this diagram of aligning programs so that they're working on projects that achieve multiple benefits, and we're organizing our regulatory processes to incentivize those projects that achieve multiple outcomes and accelerate our progress towards those system outcomes. And then funding and finance, there's really kind of two aspects that we're looking at here. There's funding and finance for the sort of planning and management activities, certainly the kinds of activities that you're undertaking now with the groundwater sustainability plan. And those might come from a variety of different sources of fees, assessments, taxes, grants, et cetera. Then there are also the funding mechanisms for the actual investments that you're going to make, the capital investments. Again, fees, assessments, tax increment financing, grants, public and private capital. There's a variety of different sources. And so what we're trying to do in the pilot is not just list those sources, but explore how would they work at the watershed scale, because you have multiple jurisdictions, multiple special districts that are doing assessments. There's a lot of complexity about how things are funded. Can you weave those together in some way to support system scale actions that might improve the sustainability of the watershed? So just quickly on kind of what we're sort of give you, now move from the conceptual to what we actually have done. So we started in August with phase 1 of this pilot, and that was really just some initial convening to understand the picture here in the Russian River, some work with DWR to try to translate what they're doing into something that made sense at the watershed level. We had a couple of workshops in October and December, and we framed up essentially a conceptual report. That report will be is being attached to the draft water plan update at the end of this month, and that just frames essentially what I've just laid out for you of kind of how could these pieces fit together. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No worries.
I did participate, and other participants included Devin Jones from the Farm Bureau, our RCD, and also Coyote Valley Tribe environmental coordinator. So there were only about 4 of us with 20 or more people in the room, and that's why I thought this presentation would be very important to bring forward. To at least update us and know that it's going on, because we are through phase 1. Yep. There will be a phase 2 that will be starting. And I wanted all the representatives to know that this process was going on. And I can't remember if Sean White participated or not.
He was not at the workshops.
Okay, he's here today too.
Yeah,
so.
great.
But anyway, I just wanted to make sure that was clear to everyone. And actually, I skipped over staff update and public comment, but we might have some public comments to this whole process after your presentation.
Okay, great. Yeah, that'd be helpful. So let me introduce a little bit what we're thinking in terms of phase 2. We've set out a very ambitious scope, and let me start by saying that the 2 drivers for phase 2 are, one, the final water plan update is providing some additional input and guidance to that. And then the second is the California Economic Summit, which DWR has been a participant in. It's going to be in Santa Rosa in November, and that's been a forum on this kind of regional water management sustainability. That's been a forum for the last 3 years. The summit has set some sustainability goals for water in California. And so that's another opportunity to take the ideas developed here and share them with other regions across the state. And I would also mention that already there's been quite a bit of interest as DWR has talked to other regions. They're already wanting to sign up to do a pilot. They're really interested in what's happening here. There is a pilot that's gearing up now in the Santa Ana watershed. So there's a lot of interest in sort of how can these things come together more effectively. So just quickly, the steps we want to go through in phase 2 is first developing the convening plan. How do we bring everybody together and share knowledge, share information? We anticipate that we'll do 3 or so workshops between now and September. We're working on setting up a leadership group or a coordinating group that'll meet monthly and provide some guidance and direction as we proceed. And then we expect we'll also have some technical coordination on some of the subject matter expertise. The first really targeted deliverable, if you will, or agreement document is that we want to put together this came out of the workshop we had in December. There's a lot of recognition in the watershed that we've done a lot. There's been a lot of studies. There's been a lot of planning. We know a lot, but it hasn't really been synthesized into a story at the watershed scale. And so that's really the first thing we want to do in the next few months is review that information, talk to the specialists, the experts who've been involved, and synthesize that into, if you will, a problem statement of the watershed. What are the challenges at the system scale in the watershed? That then becomes the basis for thinking about, well, what if those really are the problems and challenges, what would we try to do about it? And those might be related to water supply reliability, groundwater sustainability, water quality, flood management. But what then are the actions that could have multiple benefits across those subject areas? Do that fairly quickly on a conceptual level, and then dig into, so if these are the things that you wanted to do, what's needed in terms of the regulatory processes, the funding structures, and even in terms of governance or decision making? What kinds of things would be needed to move that forward? And that's fundamentally the state's interest, is to support regions in understanding what sustainability means for the region, and then finding ways to provide that support that helps them move forward. The state has a hard time understanding what that support can and should be. So the idea is to pilot that here and get some ideas back to them to say, well, if you want us to do this, this is the kind of funding structure that we need, or funding support, or regulatory alignment we need. So that's the idea through this is a more detailed timeline of that, starting to map out when will we do some workshops, when do we gather information from the state. I won't go into the detail of that, but I think that's all I had. So happy to answer any questions, or and again, as Supervisor Brown said, we're early in phase 2. We really want to coordinate across both counties, across all subject areas, and work at the system scale and understand what kinds of things should the state be incentivizing to help you folks move forward. So, any questions?
Directors, do you have questions?
Many, but I'm not sure they're appropriate for this panel. But if you hung out for a minute,
yeah,
I
I'm
would
happy
appreciate
to
it.
stay. I'll stay till the end. I'm happy to talk to you about
Thank you.
kind of where you fit. So, great.
So you'll be staying after?
Yeah, I'll stay till the end of the
Okay.
meeting, so I'm available to talk more details with anybody. So,
Great.
Great.
Okay.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Charles. All righty. We're going to go back up the agenda. And Sarah, did you have a staff update? Pardon? Oh, yeah, but I was going to get to public comment, but I didn't know. I skipped over Sarah. Okay. Public comment for this item? Seeing none, we'll go back up to public comments on items not on the agenda. Seeing no one come forward. Sarah, did you have a staff update?
Certificate, Mendocino County Executive Office. I don't at this time. All of the other items I'll talk about is later in the agendized section.
Okay, thanks. All righty, going forward, we are now on item B, discussion of possible action regarding development of the Technical Advisory Committee Memorandum of Understanding. Staff, will you present the item, please?
Certificate, Mendocino County. I'd like to invite up our working group members if they're here. I think I saw Dawn. I don't see Tamara. Patty Vadigan's also here. Laurel. Am I missing one?
Do you need more chairs?
We can just kind of make
Oh, okay.
So in your agenda packet, you'll see a little bit of background. So you directed us to begin the process of working on an MOU agreement with Sonoma County Water Agency and the other members of the TAC and the JPA. So we formed a working group of myself, Dawn, Laurel, Patty, and also Tamara from Flood Control, and our director, Zach Robinson. No, Al White. So I will just give you a little bit of background. We did take that framework, and Sonoma County was gracious enough to work with their county council on presenting it. So I can just go over the categories, and then we can open it up to your comment, and all of us can kind of put in our 2 cents of the process. So as you'll see, you'll have the recitals. It talks a little bit about the agency and the goals of the TAC. In the agreement, we talk about the purpose and the authority and what the TAC will be doing in terms of making recommendations to the board regarding SGMA, and that's item 1. Item 2, the process of recommendations by the TAC to the board of directors. Item 3 is a little bit about the committee governance and the memberships, and like before, it's each member of the board of directors will have a representative on the TAC, in addition to the RCD, Sonoma County Water Agency, CLSI. Moving down to the 4th section, which talks about terminating the MOU. Section 5 is talking about additional matters of mutual interest that we would be potentially working on in a collaborative regional environment. And then 6 is just some of the general provisions. And then it will end with the members who are going to be signing on to the agreement. So I'll at this time turn it over to our other working group members to add anything you want to add of things of note, and then open it up back to the board for your comment and input.
Don Seymour from the Sonoma County Water Agency. Thank you for having us today. As Sarah indicated, it was a collaborative process in developing this MOU. Our county council took a stab at developing a draft that was circulated among all the members. Tamara worked with, provided a number of suggestions based on feedback from, I think, conversations with you all. Then that was circulated. We had a phone call with all the ad hoc members participating, including Board Member White. I think we came to consensus on most of these issues, and so we're hoping this is something we can push through. So we're ready to support the board.
Anyone else? I just wanted to point out, and this would be on page 5, and that is inserting the names of the representatives. So that would evolve as membership changes, is that correct? Or appointments changed?
What I would suggest for who's listed under there of the parties is the contacts for the organizations, and then they can send in their representatives of who they want to represent. So for the UOVBGSA, it could be the Mendocino County Water Agency, or it could be the chair, but you could choose a representative, because over the long term, you probably will change representatives that are going to be coming to the TAC. But I would have the contact at each agency as the person.
Okay. I would agree with that, because it kind of concerned me with whoever you may appoint. Those may be changes, so the MOU would revolve around all those changes, and I would just rather see the organizational name along with contact information, I believe. At least that's my opinion. Anyone else?
The only thing that,
Director White,
Yeah.
turn on your microphone, please.
I think it's.
Oh, is it on?
Yeah,
Okay.
the only thing that I'm confused about is the membership. It sounds like there's a member of the GSA when you look at on page 5, but on page 1, the membership is just the RCD, SQA, CLSI. I'm just not sure, I mean, yeah, County Mendocino, City of Ukiah, IRWA, flood control. I just don't understand. I don't think that a member of the GSA is on the TAC. I mean, I don't think it's supposed to be. I don't think that was the intent. But
I think we had that on page 5. So can we answer his question?
So on page 1B, that talks about the formation of the agency. So that was formed by those 4 agencies in a JPA. And then following the formation, we appointed the agricultural seat and the tribal seat. So that's talking more about the formation itself.
Oh, I get it. Yeah, 3.1 then.
And then
actually has the
on
members.
page 3, it talks about the makeup of the TAC, which is defined in the JPA. And that would be the County of Mendocino, City of Ukiah, Upper Russian River Water Agency, Russian River Flood Control, the tribal and agricultural seats, MCRCD, Sonoma County Water Agency, CLSI. So
Right.
it kind of goes, that's kind of why there's a difference between the two.
So I understand that, but if you look at the list in 3.1, there is no UVB GSA as a member.
Whereas there is on page 5.
Yes.
There is on page 5 because the MOU is not with the individual members of the TAC. The MOUs are between the agencies. So your 7 seats on the TAC are representative of each seat on the board. So in terms of the membership, it calls out each seat's agency. But when you enter into the MOU agreement with the other agencies, you're entering into it as the Ukiah Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency. And you're going to have 7 seats on the TAC. And the 7 seats are called out specifically in the JPA agreement. So that's why they're called out on 3.1, if that makes sense. So each person you appoint to the TAC, they can't sign on to an MOU because the MOU is an agreement between multiple agencies. So you as the agency will sign on with the other 3 agencies. And then each agency will have a certain number of seats they can appoint to. Yours in particular will have 7, representing each of the original agencies that came into the JPA agreement plus the 2 appointed seats.
But I think Mr. White's point is we would have 1 representative from this body.
No,
Well,
you
that
have
was my
7.
question.
You have 7.
Yeah. In
So-
other words, yes,
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
that
because
would-
in the JPA agreement that you entered into, it specifically called out those agencies. So in the JPA agreement, it says County of Mendocino shall have 1, City of Ukiah shall have 1, Upper Russian River shall have 1, so on and so on. And each of you are representative of the UVB GSA. So you're entering into the agreement with the 3 other agencies, and then you as the body get to appoint 7 seats, 1 for each of you.
But it wouldn't be one of us, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
That's what I meant by my comment, and you said it better.
Not necessarily. I mean, feasibly, I guess you could, but typically it would be you would choose technical staff from your agencies. In the case of the tribal seats, the tribal seat and the ag seat, you could choose to be on the TAC. You can choose your alternate to be on the TAC, or you could choose a representative from your field. So maybe an environmental specialist from
It
the
would be
tribe,
somebody,
something like, or maybe someone from the Farm Bureau, or maybe the alternate, Levi, can't remember his last name.
Pollen.
Okay.
So
So the TAC is ballpark 10 seats.
correct. And room for expansion. There is a section about adding members, so.
Okay. Yeah, remember
Okay,
that.
I understand.
Okay. Any other questions, directors? Okay, I do want to call for public comment. Anyone from the public that would like to comment, please come forward. State your name for the record. Seeing no one. It's back to directors. So what is your opinion? Are we going to take action today? Do we have anything else to cover on this?
I have a comment.
Oh,
You guys did a
yes.
nice job putting it together. There's some changes and improvements from the first version.
I think it's ready for prime time.
Yeah, I agree.
And so today, Sarah DeCette, Mendocino County, in the recommended action, it says provide direction to staff. So you could provide direction for us to bring it back to you for a final copy, or you can just take action of
Okay, and with no changes, probably
approving it and sending it off for
each member of the Groundwater Sustainability Agency then would take it back to their particular body for review? Nope. Okay.
It's an MOU with the UVB GSA, so you have the authority to make the decision of moving forward. And if you
Okay.
wanted to speed along the process, you could approve the MOU as stated, and we can move forward with starting the signature process.
So,
Move
we
adoption.
we do have a motion for adoption.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Okay. Roll call vote.
Director Robinson,
Aye.
Director White,
Aye.
Director Brown,
aye.
Director Crane,
Aye.
Director Cardoza, Chair Brown.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay. So next item on our agenda is discussion and possible action regarding update on the Proposition 1 Sustainable Groundwater Planning Grant Application. Ms. Duquette.
Sarah DeCette, Mendocino County. So I had a couple questions come in, so I'm going to start with some of the questions I got on the grant that we are finished up with DWR, which is the initial work. So that grant, we have some questions of who entered into it, what's the deliverables, that kind of thing. So I'll recap that. So the first grant, the counties with stress basins, the county of Mendocino applied for and was awarded that grant prior to the formation process of this agency. And within that grant, we also had some dollars to use towards the formation process, which we did use. So that grant is an agreement between DWR and the county of Mendocino. So once we got the formation process started, we thought it would be in your best interest to start presenting some of the information that we were getting in the preliminary work. So that grant finished in December of 2017, and we submitted our deliverables. Now I will say those deliverables aren't final set in stone. We did make it clear that this is initial work, and when we put together the application for phase 2, we specifically stated that these still needed to go to the technical advisory committee and still needed to go to the newly formed UVBGSA for review and approval, and those are going to be ultimately the work done in the first grant will help inform the final GSP. So nowhere in these documents your GSP are your requirements going forward. But kind of a preliminary work that was done that still needs to be reviewed by the TAC and by you in a more formal manner as we develop the overall GSP. So that's kind of how that went. We got that grant, started working on the preliminary work and support the formation process. And now that that grant's finished, the formation of the agency has occurred, we can move those items to phase 2, which is review. And there was a lot of other categories of the GSP that still needs to be developed and reviewed. And hopefully in the next 3 to 4 years, we'll have a final document for you to ultimately adopt. So that's just a little bit of background of the prior grant. Now we'll go into the second half, which is the current grant application. So, oh, yep.
Before you move to that, I need to fully understand what you just explained
Sure.
to us. Is there anything in the, well, I guess here's where I'm nervous, is when I look at the cover, it's identified as data gap analysis, Ukiah Valley Groundwater Basin, initial groundwater sustainability plan. So we have to develop a GSP.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be concerned if we were in some way wedded to this document as an initial position or statement or any kind of submission towards a GSP that we have done, because there are real problems with what this says, and that we wouldn't want to be tied to these things.
So the agency itself is not tied to this. This is a grant by the Mendocino County Water Agency and deliverables produced by the water agency and submitted to DWR in support of this formation process and moving forward. So this stuff still needs to be vetted through the newly created agency, which is why we specifically allocated line items in the next grant to do that, because there's still a lot of things to be reviewed, but also a lot of work that has to be done to give you a full picture of the basin and the direction you want to go. So in no way is this agency wedded to this material, and it was not submitted as material from this agency. So it was submitted as material from the Mendocino County Water Agency as kind of a first step in the process. So this is not your GSP. So there's a lot of time for you to look at that, tweak that, get more information, more research as we move forward in phase 2 to put together a clear picture of the plan that has to be backed by this agency.
So in this phase 2 that you're about to describe, is that with this agency, or is that?
Yes.
Okay.
So it would be the way this second phase would work. So we put down 2 agencies for this grant proposal: the Ukiah Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency and the County of Mendocino. The County of Mendocino is going to act essentially as like the fiscal and administrator of the grant, but this will be between both. So the county will be signing the contract for the vendor and the contract with the agency, but you're named in the grant application. So there's 2 agencies named, but we'll be handling the administrative aspects of the grant management and providing those deliverables and stuff. But you guys will be making the decisions throughout the process of the deliverables.
So any of those deliverables, as they are sent to the state, will move through this group for review and
yes,
approval.
and once and I'm going to talk about a little bit more about next steps here in a second, and I'll throw in a couple things. So we applied for the grant on December 1st, and in your packet you see 2 pieces of paper. One is our ranking. So we ranked high, and we're on the proposed funding list. So there's a draft funding recommendations, and then there's the second paper, which is the actual grant solicitation evaluation. So right now we're on the recommended list. I believe it's still out for public comment, but I'm going to turn around and ask Aaron when that closes.
I can see that.
Public comment closed.
I can't see it.
February 28th, public comment closed. So hopefully we'll hear soon about next steps.
Could you come forward, please? State your name for the record and make your comments. Thank you.
Sure.
Aaron.
Aaron Cuthbertson, Department of Water Resources.
So the question was, what are the next steps for this grant?
For public comment closing and when the
Right.
DWR will be reaching out to the agencies.
So public comments are closed, and the next step is the our recommendations for funding, and that will happen, the final recommendations for funding. That happens at the end of this month, early April, right in that range. I wanted to touch on your, as long as I'm up here, so you had a question about the previous grant and whether you're wedded to that as a GSP or not. So DWR doesn't consider that a GSP. The GSP regulations weren't written when that grant program was developed. So we look at that as preliminary work towards a GSP. So even though if it says initial GSP on there, we don't consider it a GSP. It satisfies the requirements of the grant. It doesn't satisfy the requirements of a GSP, and we didn't expect it to.
Thank you.
So it wouldn't, things that are contained in there, if ultimately we choose to reject them and say, you know, these things are not something that we support, we're not going to have that come back and say, but you had it here, and so you're tied to it in some way?
No, you'll submit a GSP at some point in the future, and that's what we'll look at.
Okay.
Yep.
Any other questions of Aaron? Okay, seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Sarah Duquette, Mendocino County. So once we receive the word from the state that we're part of the final recommendation and we're going to start the process, we go into a contract negotiation. At that time, we look at the contract with DWR and the agencies, and within it there's deliverables and timelines and a lot of those things. And we can definitely bring that to the board before we ultimately sign the grant agreement. So you have a good understanding of the deliverables of this grant and the timelines for those deliverables. So that will happen in the next couple months. Simultaneously, we went out for an RFP in January for technical assistance in developing a GSP in line with the grant that we're in the process of being awarded. That I can't get into too many details because it is confidential, so I can't tell you how many proposals we have or who proposed because we are in a competitive process, so it is confidential. But it did go out. The RFP period closed. We do have proposals, and we're now in that evaluation stage. Once that evaluation stage is complete, a vendor is chosen, we go into a contract negotiation with the vendor. Once we have that negotiated contract, that will come back to the board, and you'll be able to make adjustments of whether you want to you want to take our recommendations and enter into a contract with this vendor, and an opportunity to give you feedback if you're not comfortable with some of the items in the contract. And so we're hoping that we can simultaneously have this going with the ultimate grant of entering into a contract with the state and entering into a contract with the vendor to start at the beginning of the fiscal year. So, you know, some of the timelines with the state kind of got moved around because of the fire, so we're working with that, but ultimately we're trying to make sure that we have the contract with the state signed and a vendor signed around the same time. And you'll be able to see both the contract with the state and the contract with the vendor. And so you'll hear more from us on the RFP and the state probably at the May meeting is my guess.
Vice Chair Crane.
Question. Was your office provided with any information by the evaluators as to why the 2 points were lost or not gained?
No.
Is that irritating or frustrating?
You know, I will say we scored the same as the Sonoma County proposals, so I think we did one heck of a good job.
It didn't answer the question.
You know, it's almost impossible to get a perfect score, so I'm happy with it. It's higher than previous grant applications, so.
Well done.
Directors, any other questions? Staff, any other comments? I'll call for public comment on this particular item. Anyone that would like to speak, please come forward. Seeing no one, we'll go on to the next agenda item. And that's 7 directors' reports.
Nothing to report.
I have what might be considered 2 questions, but now might be appropriate. First question, the USGS, who's conducting another study of the Russian River. Yeah. Well, it's a broader study for groundwater. I think everyone knows what I'm talking about. It's
Yes.
a 5-year study.
Right.
They would like to come up and present. They're all based in San Diego, apparently. And I was on a phone call, and it was mentioned casually whether or not it would be appropriate for them to come and present at this forum. So before I said an automatic yes, I just wanted to make sure that everyone else was in agreement. We'd like to hear what they're up to.
Oh, sure. And I'm not sure which, because we've got a number of studies going on, and you talked about San Diego, so it's Scripps. Is that the FIRO, or are you talking about the other study that's going on with USGS?
I think it's the other one.
Okay.
First name Tracy. I don't know Tracy's last name.
Yeah. She go.
Come forward, Don. State your name for the record,
Thanks, Don.
because I know Don's involved too. Sonoma County Water Agency.
It should be on.
Okay, as Director Robinson was talking about, that's that cooperative study with the Sonoma County Water Agency, Mendocino County folks, and the state board. And so they've, USGS has been doing work on that study, and they'd really like to have an opportunity to do some outreach up in Mendocino County, which hasn't been done yet.
Okay, thank you.
Would it make sense to collaborate and have them do a visit here? And I'm sure you guys want to check in too. We had previously spoken about some avenues that might be good for the USGS to get the word out to the most people. And so I talked to Director Robinson about what his suggestions would be. And so we thought this might be a forum that they could come present. And if there's other suggestions, we'd want to get that information back to the USGS to kind of get the broadest number of folks, representing ag, representing urban, to, have a good understanding of what the study is doing.
Sure. No, and I'd like to have that update myself. And I think this would be a good one because we are televised. So it'll go out to the greater public as well, and anybody missing can always go back to the tape.
And I would actually describe it, it's broader than just groundwater. It's a full watershed study that's going to be a coupled surface water groundwater model. So it's broader than just
Right.
So this would be an excellent forum, I think, to present what the status of that study.
Okay. Thank you so much, Don. And staff, did you have further comment?
We are happy to accommodate that, and we can also accommodate if they want to do a meeting at a later time or in a different time period. We can be flexible.
Okay. Would you do outreach? Chairman Crane, did you have comment?
I think that's a good thing to do.
Okay. He is in full agreement. I think everybody is. And so, pardon?
Might be worth polling.
Okay. I think everybody's saying yes.
Consensus here.
Okay. And could you do the outreach to try to set the date for our next meeting? Or we would have to figure a special time if they can't make that date. Further under director's reports, anyone?
Nothing.
I'm going to hog a little bit more time.
Okay.
I had asked Sarah, and I don't know if you had a chance to look at it or not, but I'm very curious about definitions for underflow and how that is incorporated in our domain of study here. Because I noticed some of the initial reports that were submitted to the state had talked about monitoring underflow wells. And as soon as I saw that word, I said, oh, wait a second. I didn't think that's part of what we're doing here. Did you get a chance?
Well, I did have a chance to look at it and briefly talk about it with Aaron, so I'd like to invite DWR back up. They were going to look into other things too in terms of what's in the regulations and underflow. So we can give you a slight update. I don't know if it's going to answer all your questions, but we'll work on it.
Aaron Cuthbertson, Department of Water Resources. Okay, so underflow wells, and what we're talking about are wells close to the river, where you the idea is that you have a more or less a direct conduit between the river and the well. So it's you consider that a surface water diversion. Okay. So the concern is that Sigma is going to start to weigh in on these because they're wells. Sigma will have some sort of control over these what you're calling surface water diversions. So there's a concern there. We understand that. I don't have an answer for how those are going to be defined. I imagine that the GSA is going to have to deal with that, come up with some definition of what, take a look at the wells, and it may be on an individual basis because it's going to depend on how close it is to the river, what the geology is, what kind of connection there is to the water table and the river. All of that's going to come into play, I think. So I can't answer the question generally. I think it's going to be more on an individual basis. That's what I think. We've had some discussions at DWR. I pushed this up to legal so they can take a look at it, because I think it's going to be, we're looking at how Sigma interfaces with other programs we have, like the frost protection program, right? And we don't have a good answer for that yet, but we're going to take a look at it, and we can have some more discussions on this. But I pushed it up the chain, and we'll hopefully get some clarification on this.
There's a couple instances that have already shown up where we're double booking water. For example, these underflow wells right next to the river are being reported with their annual usage reports as underflow water, coming under contract with the flood control district. But at the same time, I noticed that those wells have also, it looks like, been included in another budget for groundwater extraction.
Okay.
So obviously those gallons can't be in both categories. They got to be one place or another. Any additional thoughts or guidance on that issue? Should it be in our groundwater budget, do you think?
That, I don't know the answer to that, and I think it's going to depend on the specific wells.
Okay.
Yeah.
We go back to what we call the color of water.
Yeah.
Which is it that's being reported? Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, anything else?
Just want to add a comment onto what Zach said, which is
Absolutely.
the challenge for us, the challenge for everyone involved, is that unless there is an agreed upon, universally defined definition of what's what, every time you refer to something that isn't clear, it becomes a point of dispute. You use it because it's advantages your side of an argument, and the other side will use a different definition because it advantages their side of the argument.
Yeah.
And I really don't want to get in the middle of something like that. So I hope that you can come back with clear guidance so that we can all know, what's up and what's down.
That's why I said the color of water. I think we've struggled with this question for several decades. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Okay, anyone else? Please come forward. State your name for the record.
Brian Wallace, LACO. With the discussion between Al and Zach and Aaron regarding the Phase 1 deliverables, and if there's certain issues with them, it's not going to be part of the GSP, but if certain components were good that do satisfy the regulations, there may be some benefit in the DWR reviewing Phase 1 work and providing a thumbs up if that would be possible in 2018. I'm not sure if that's something that they could take care of, but it might be worth looking into.
I'm not sure what you're saying.
It's like if certain components of the initial groundwater sustainability plan were accepted by the GSA and vetted, and then there could be a request to DWR to validate if they are sufficient for the GSP measures. Since they were part of that first grant opportunity, maybe there could be an opportunity there to get some review of them and then get them accepted and know that that part is done. Is that something that you think could be part of the phase 1 work or no?
Please come to the microphone. Aaron, just sit right next to Sarah. Thank you.
Okay. Aaron Cuthbertson, Department of Water Resources. So the GSPs will be reviewed as a whole.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
we won't be doing formal review before that. So the answer is no. We won't be able to review those sections prior to you submitting the entire GSP because it kind of needs to be reviewed
As a
en
whole.
masse. So yeah, no.
Copy. Okay, thank you.
But I do believe if our TAC is looking at all the information, they could probably make a recommendation, I would think, unless we have directors that want to do that in that phase 1. Yes.
I look at this as one piece of a larger picture. This is
Yes.
one analysis.
Right.
We've got work that's been done by Sam Sandoval. We've got
Yes.
USGS work.
Yes.
Sonoma County Water Agency is doing work on these very subjects.
Exactly.
In my mind, all these things would be in the TAC to be considered and to have them looking for the strengths and weaknesses in each one and how you can take from everything the best that you've got to put together the best plan that we can get. So I'm not being critical of this.
No,
in
no,
its
I
entirety.
understand. Yeah.
I just say that it's incomplete and it has good points and other points that
Could be very broadly
we
debated.
could leave out. And it's just a piece of the picture, which, yeah, I'm really glad that we have this. This is something more than we had before.
Yes. Yeah. Anyone else, directors? Seeing none. Any more public comment? Come forward and state your name for the record.
Devin Jones, Mendocino County Farm Bureau. Sorry, quick question. I was just thinking, was there discussion over a time frame when each director or entity would be coming back to think about who to appoint to the TAC, just for consideration?
I
can start at Mendocino County kind of tackle that. So now that we have approval from you, it will no longer be in draft form. We'll start getting the signatures of the agencies. But if you want to start that conversation for this board member, we can agendize that for the April meeting. And we can put together some type of process. Maybe it's like a letter or a formal, something that you can take action on. But we can start that conversation in April. And then once all the signatures happen on the MOU, it will be finalized. So I would say that we should kind of aim for having the TAC completed and all of the, not only the document signed, but all of the agencies have their appointees by July, so that we can not only have the grant agreement in place, the vendor agreement in place, but also the TAC. So you can really then at the start of the fiscal year kind of jump off and really start that process for the GSP. So that would be what I would suggest.
Okay, so we'll have it on the agenda in April. And we're looking at a deadline by July.
Could we move that deadline up a little? I mean, once the identity of the members is decided, which is essentially done now except for signatures, is there a reason to have like several months before each of those members have selected their participant, their representative to sit on that?
So you would like to perhaps have it done in May at the latest, June, or?
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
They've gone to this much time to get to this point. Mm-hmm. They only need to pick their person. I'd be happy to have that happen as soon as possible, whenever it can happen, you know.
Okay.
If that can be at the same time, that would be fine with me.
So you're saying April?
Yeah. I mean, why wait? We've got some time between now and January 22, but every month counts.
Sure.
Yeah, we can get the UVB GSA appointees kind of taken care of in April, and then I think the other agencies probably could have theirs in April or May, depending on when their boards meet. But I think it's reasonable to do it before then, and we can kind of push that you know, we're taking care of it in April. We'd really like our partners to also appoint their people sooner rather than later.
Sure.
Anyone that helped work on the MOU that may be here representing one of the agencies, do you have any comment or suggestions of a deadline? So like the RCD, I don't know.
Patty
you
Madigan,
know,
Mendocino County
meet
RCD.
different times.
We meet the third Tuesday of each month, so we can put this on the agenda probably for this month, and we can let Sarah know who we will have representing. If it's not me, it might be one of my colleagues or a board member. Does it have to be a staff member of an organization, or can it be a board member? Do you have any? I don't think it specifies in the MOU.
It does not.
So
it does not.
Okay. So I think that the timeline sounds fine for us.
Okay,
Thank you.
That's good. Thank you. Would it work for California Land Stewardship Institute? Okay. I think it's going to work.
Yeah.
So you get your wish, Director White. Everybody be ready to bring forth names for the next meeting in April. And I think those names should be turned in at least a week and a half before our meeting. I'll have Sarah look at a date because we have to do a legal posting. And I really don't want to have those blank because the public deserves to know. I want to have that transparency. Okay. Yes.
Sarah DeKett, Mendocino County, if you could get me your names by April 2nd, which is a Monday.
I'm glad you didn't say April Fool's Day.
No, because we usually will publish the agendas on the Friday before this meeting, Thursday before this meeting. So Monday, if you could each individually either email me or give me a call.
Okay. Does that work for everybody? Not seeing anyone thinking it won't work. So anything else? Staff, anything else? All righty. We're adjourned.
Okay.
Thank you.